This young man, Henry, is unusually talented. A firm, unhesitant line drawn with assurance and great skill. But he ought to be good because he's been practicing for about 200 years. He's one of a remarkable trio of automatons, built in the 18th century, long before electronics or transistors, before batteries, even before electricity. But in the field of pure applied mechanics, they've never been surpassed. Certainly, they have style, not just the mere clockwork precision that you might expect. We're all used to push buttons, to automation and electric brains, but there's something charming, almost touching about this young chap who's been producing his careful sketches during 3 lifetimes. And this is how he does it. An unusual behind-the-clothes look at his driving force. 3 sets of cams that give him that dexterous attention to detail. There's a second mechanism to bring all 12 cams into play and cause his eyes to follow the deft movements of his drawing hand. And when he stops to appraise what he's done, make him blow away any dust that's settled on his pad. Just watch. As an artist, he's skilled at 4 drawings, and as you can see, he's a young man of his time. Louis XVI facing Marie Antoinette, Cupid in a chariot lashing out at a butterfly, and a finely shaded dog. As the young artist completes this sketch, he stops, considers, and then writes in a decisive hand, "Mon toutou," my doggy. And that diligent young chap has a big sister, Marianne. A musical sister, this one, sitting patiently at her little harmonium, waiting to be urged to play. And she plainly finds it an emotional moment. And when she plays, she really plays. None of that mechanical pianola tune grinding here. The fingers of a modern automaton merely follow the keys while the instrument does the playing. But this minuet depends upon these fingers, which must press the correct keys of a clavecin anyone could play with practice. She and her brothers were created by Pierre Jacquet Dreux, who lived in the mountains near Neuchâtel between 1721 and 1790, in that century of enlightenment. The clockmaking industry had made its appearance here 50 years earlier, towards the end of the 17th century, and Jacquet Dreux became perhaps the most skilled watchmaker and mechanic of his age. And if these friendly automatons enchant and fascinate us today, well, you can imagine with what wonder they were received 200 years ago. Then they travelled in state to the courts and palaces of Europe, to London and Paris and St. Petersburg, spent many years in Spain, reappeared in Paris in 1812, passed most of the last century in Germany, and came home to Neuchâtel in 1906. The second brother, Charles, is perhaps the most gifted of all. He's a writer and can compose almost any message in a fine, regular 18th century hand. Like many writers, he can be temperamental. He won't tolerate any sudden change in temperature. A few degrees warmer or cooler, and he'll sulk, make spelling mistakes, neglect his spacing, even forget to write at all. As needed, he dips his quill into an inkwell of ordinary ink, a wonderfully natural movement followed by his head and his eyes. That careful hand is guided by mechanisms even more complex than those of his brother and sister. One directs the boy's wrist in 3 directions, another controls the upward and downward movement of the meticulous handwriting and animates his head and his eyes. Almost all the brass cams for his 44 letters and a full stop are the originals fashioned by Jacquet Droz, though 1 or 2, getting a little thin around the edges after 2 centuries of scribble, 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 have been reinforced by steel plates, filed down to match the original profiles. Only clothes and wigs have been replaced, and they remain in keeping with their time. Each month, the clothes are cleaned and pressed, and a hairdresser comes to give them all a shampoo and set. As the immaculate Charles writes on, he carefully watches his pen, an expression full of attention. He writes in French normally, but he can manage a well-known phrase in almost any language.